Intuitively, what we don't want to do is test AI in very high stakes circumstances. The higher the stakes, the higher the risk, the less that seems like an appropriate place in which to test out AI systems. But, perhaps unsurprisingly, my guest today says, no, actually, the military is precisely where you want to test out complicated AI systems. And he knows a little bit about the military system. He was a commander in the US Navy, where he served for 23 years. And now he's the founder and CEO of a company called Fathom 5, which is an industrial cybersecurity company focused on the maritime industry. And we had this really wide-ranging conversation about how the military operates, and more specifically, how it operates in such a way that we should be encouraged by its use of AI, when in fact it does use AI, and that it's a good place to test out AI. We talked about the fact that the military does a tremendous amount of operational testing. They do a lot of safety verification. They have a lot of what he calls watchers. There's lots of people watching, monitoring technology. And then he drew this really interesting contrast, as you'll hear, between having watchers on the payroll as a matter of course for the military, where that's not the case in a corporate context. In corporations, you don't typically spend all the money or a lot of money on watchers, whereas in the military, that's a standard thing that you do. And of course, if you have lots of watchers, that's going to make it a safer environment in which to test your systems, including AI systems. And then the last thing we talked a little bit about is, that's not the last thing we talked about, but one of the other things that we talked about was that there's a culture of self-critique and skepticism within the military. While the stereotype is everybody falls in line, the truth of the matter is that it's a culture that invites dispute, disagreement, argument, having to show your work and prove that you've got the right position. And so, again, really wide-ranging conversation on how the military operates and how that interacts with how you might think about AI systems. And one of the last things that I'll highlight that I thought was a really interesting aspect of the conversation is that he thinks there's an entire sort of section of engineering that hasn't yet been invented, what he calls orchestration engineering. And the core of that is we don't have standard or figured out even engineering practices for how we should have AI interact with the components of a larger system, all the stuff that the AI connects with. So just, again, really fun, interesting conversation and very educational about how the military operates. All right. That's what that conversation is about. I am your host, Reed Blackman. This is Ethical Machines. You can email me at em@reedblackman.com. You can go to my Substack at reedblackman.substack.com. Blah, blah, blah. Who cares? Let's go talk to Zac. All right, so Zac, you've got A, an interesting sort of backstory, and B, a really interesting claim, which is that, totally counterintuitive, the best place to test for the safety of AI is the military. And of course, that sounds, I think, to the ears of most people as a totally bananas claim, because the military context is the last place that you want to use AI, and you think it's the best. So maybe you can say a little bit about your background so we know that you're not a lunatic, and then you can hear a little bit more about why you think it's the safest.
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure my entire background will convey a lack of lunacy, but we'll give it a shot. Yeah, so,
it's necessary, but not sufficient. Yeah.
Yeah, so Rita, I've spent most of my life working for the nation and the defense of our nation. Naval Academy, then 23 years active duty, culminating in leading cyber warfare research and development at Naval Postgraduate School, but always working at like frontier technology and its integration and adoption by the military and electronic warfare and cyber. And then AI as it related to cyber offense during the time. So this is something I've been steeped in for a long time and thought a lot about safety and ethics. And so from all of that, right, I'm making the, what do you say, bonkers with the nuts claim that
bananas? I think bananas. Some kind of fruit for some reason. I don't know why.
That I think the test and evaluation of artificial intelligence within the military context actually has a lot more guardrails on it than people would assume from the outset, and is an ethical and appropriate way to develop this groundbreaking technology in the first 20, 30 years of people experimenting with it.
Yeah. And is that because, I have to imagine, people have made this kind of claim about AI in the military, it's not safe, yada, yada. This is going to lead to the end times. The military's AI decides to act on its own, and then we have cascading failures until everyone is dead. And that always struck me as it has to be an exaggeration because I can't imagine that the military deploys technologies without testing the shit out of them.
And although
that's the term the military uses, right?
that's
I
like
think that's a
that's
military.
right. We've got bananas and testing the shit out of it. We're getting down to
Yeah.
engineering approach to that.
I'm a military man. At the end of the day, I'm a military man. But
no, you're right. So there are lots of places where we're doing a lot of what I would call kind of unstructured learning right now in autonomy. And you can go look at lots of our articles recently about how lots of our autonomous systems that are running into each other and things. So that's the learn forward, fail forward piece of it for sure. But the interesting thing for me is just to get after this point with that example is like those are controlled, observable trials where failure of the autonomous system is both noted and higher performance and safety are required, where 0 people have been hurt. So if we think about the initial rollout of AI, it was primarily in content targeting and ad targeting. And what we know 10 or 12 years later is that social media's kind of attention-based algorithms have caused grave harm to generations, particularly with young women.
Sure.
And so we look at this and we say, hey, the unregulated rollout of AI, where its purpose is first and foremost in deciding and generating content that ends up in front of people, has proven to not be a good approach.
Yeah. Okay. So when we say, so you used the word autonomy a few times, talk about autonomous AI. We were talking about AI more generally earlier, I think anyway, when we were talking about the safest place to test out AI is in a military context. So can you say a little bit about how you think about autonomous AI, the extent to which you're primarily thinking about autonomous AI is the military context is the safest context in which to deploy? Is it autonomous AI specifically? Is it AI more generally? So just say a little bit about that.
It's definitely AI more generally. So that's good. Everybody, these words are so overloaded right now. It's probably a good thing to nail this down. So I'm saying AI more generally. Autonomy for just maneuvering autonomy. Can this unmanned, uncrewed, small boat maneuver safely in San Diego Harbor, for example? Sure. So when I say autonomy, I'm primarily talking about navigational and maneuvering autonomy. And then we say AI more generally.
Because you're out of the Naval Academy, or you're a Navy man.
Yeah. Still a Navy man. It's in my blood, right?
Yeah.
But what I am saying, my claim is actually AI more broadly. And the reason why is because a couple. First off, the use cases have low probability of harm. So the Navy's first program of record for artificial intelligence is predictive maintenance, is looking at machinery trends and saying, hey, that bearing is going to go bad in about a month. This filter needs to be changed right now. The only, the goodness there is fast indicator of failure, right? The machine breaks, et cetera. So we can learn quickly. Even a bad outcome isn't that bad. An engine blows, a compressor fails because the AI missed it. And so there's no human or societal harm in that, in those use cases. Further out on what I would say the future concept is AI around autonomous warfighting. So making kill, no kill decisions about things.
Sure.
But the nice thing about where we're at today is that's not where a lot of the AI is. It's just around optimizing and maneuvering machines. And then the second thing is the military has a very robust verification and validation. They have a whole organization, for operational tests and developmental tests to make sure that systems perform the way that they're supposed to. And so it's one of the few organizations that has such a kind of large and robust and pre-existing safety verification team that it's easy to say, hey, this new technology is just like just another new technology. And we're going to make sure it works the way we expect it to work before we let you use it at scale. It's very difficult to think of other industries that have those teams built in and in place.
Okay, so let me try to draw a divide between two kinds of things. So you've got things like the brake lights go on. The brake lights go on, and we're really good, we the military that is, are really good at installing brake lights that work well, which is great because when the brake light goes on, we go fix the brakes. And then, so that's the predictive maintenance bit.
Yeah.
And that's great, good. I take it though that a lot of the issue with whether it's automation or autonomy, which I take to be different things. I think about automation as it just automatically goes through deterministic steps, whereas autonomy has more to do with choosing an end goal or having an end goal in sight and then choosing, as it were, by itself, how to achieve that goal.
Having an objective and choosing the course of the objective. Yeah, I agree.
So that feels more, okay. So as we move into really complex terrain, literally and metaphorically, where there's so many variables at play, it seems to me that AI can break down in a number of ways that are not predictable, in the way that, the brake pads are wearing thin, or whatever goes wrong on a submarine, which you can say more about that I don't know about, but I get that they're not brake pads, I imagine. I can see the predictive maintenance stuff making a lot of sense from an engineering perspective. I actually wonder whether, because the military is so good at that kind of prediction and testing and maintenance, that actually, and this is me just casting about in a way, one might worry that they're not good at these completely novel situations in which AI finds itself, contexts that weren't predictable, perhaps because there are so many variables. This is one of the problems with self-driving cars, right? Self-driving cars fail not because they can't spot turns and stop signs and things like that, but because the environment is so complex and human drivers act in such unpredictable ways that you would get car accidents and we get unreliable self-driving cars. So wouldn't we have the same problem with the kind of things that you're talking about? And is there reason to think that the military is particularly good at overseeing technology in circumstances that are so complex as to be unpredictable?
Yeah, a couple of things there. First off, you're absolutely right. There's a vast difference between saying the brake pads need to be replaced. It's just because lots of stuff in the military does have brake pads, so we're just going to roll in your version, right? But actually higher order level maintenance that are system of systems design. So a lot of times when any industrial organization does failure mode analysis, they're looking at an individual system in isolation. But once you put it on that ship or the submarine, now it's vibrating, and there are all sorts of system of systems outcomes that weren't discoverable in the original failure mode analysis. So actually, the AI to predict machine failure is substantially more complicated. It's actually starting to look at that entire failure mode analysis, given kind of the in-situ deployment of the equipment, which is a lot less deterministic than the pure physics-based models. So that is actually a little more complicated than you would look at face value. But even on to the next category of autonomy, controlling a machine to the standard that a human would control a machine, that's your driving, like apples to apples comparison, right?
Yeah.
And what I would say there is, let's take the Waymo car, because there's a lot of them running around Austin here.
Sure, yeah.
I saw a Waymo car do something just completely asinine. Bananas, in fact.
Yeah, that's the technical term, yeah.
What is that car doing, right? And I'm pretty sure I'm the only one that saw it. If the car thought it was normal, I doubt it shows up in the review data as a flag, right? And so as I was hitting the brakes to let this thing make a crazy left turn to a road, not a raid, it occurred to me, the number one thing about all of our early DoD systems going out is there is a bunch of watchers. And so just the way we're structured to observe the performance of these systems in situ is different, because I think there is a lot more expense involved in having the watchers watch the thing that the for-profit autonomy companies just don't want to spend the money to do, because AI engineers cost $1 bazillion these days. Whereas the DoD already has the people on payroll, a lot of whom are skeptical about it, who are going to be really close watchers. So again, organizationally, the test structure is there to do the verification and validation. The watchers are already on payroll and skeptically observing behavior and providing that feedback. Now, there's some things the military doesn't do well, which is provide
put a pin in X. I've got questions and I don't want to lose them. So just remember the things that the military doesn't do well. Okay.
I never forget that list, buddy.
Yeah, good. Okay, good. So you highlighted two things, both of which I want to say something about and ask you for a follow-up on one of them.
Yeah.
One thing you said, which was the second thing, is this monitoring component. So one of the things that I've written about is, as AI gets more complicated and the context of deployment explode, which we saw from narrow to generative and now from generative to agentic, the context of deployment explode, which means the contexts of deployment are unpredictable. Who knows how Mark and Sally and HR or Mark or whatever are going to use this agentic AI to generate ads? Who knows what they're going to use it for? We have some vague sense, but people do all sorts of crazy things, right? As you mentioned, as well as Waymo cars. that means that since you can't test for every possible context of deployment, the importance of monitoring skyrockets.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess your point is the military has literally people who are the watchers, and corporations usually don't, because that's just not how they spend money. But for whatever reason, I guess the military is more careful. And so you've got more watchers. So that's interesting.
And perhaps not just more careful, right? I think so. So let's just think that through, right? If you're a for-profit company and hiring watchers, the bias of those watchers is going to be the company person. Oh yeah, we did this like this. The bias of the skeptical people in the military who aren't sure that this AI is being sent to them, actually is going to make them more critical.
And is your point something like you're worried about yes men in a business context where people don't want to be the naysayers, but in a military context, the culture is conducive to there being naysayers?
Absolutely.
Interesting. Yeah. And can you say more about that now? Why do you think, or how does the military make it the case that they invite that kind of critical reflection or criticism or critique or something like that?
Yeah. You say all the time, right? Look at the incentives and you'll probably be able to predict organizational behavior, right? So right now you really have two cultures in the military. One that says autonomous warfare is the future. It's our best deterrence against China. We can't outbuild them, et cetera, et cetera. We've got to make this work. And so they're very biased, leaning forward to try a bunch of other stuff. And then you've got basically the rest of the military that's like, man, I'm not sure about that. These other things have worked really well for 20 or 30 years. And those two sides are both right and valid and accepted in today's military culture. So for every person you have out there hollering from the top of the mountain that the future of warfare is all robotic and autonomous, you've got three other people going, yeah, show me, dude, because I've never seen it.
Yeah. So I guess the point is the military fosters, or at least permits, a level of skepticism that you might not find in a corporation. Where
absolutely,
which is surprising. The stereotype, right, is orders from on top, everyone complies, everyone wears the same damn thing, packs their backpack exactly the same way, like walks the same way, has the same haircut, and questioning is not allowed because the whole point is we need obedience, we need compliance in order to have an efficient working machine. Yeah. So is that just, I guess what you're saying is that picture, while it might have elements of the truth, also fails to capture the level of critical reflection that is permitted within the military.
Absolutely. I think so. If you read the professional journals of the military, professional journals of the Navy are the U.S. Naval Institute Proceedings and the Naval War College Review. The professional journal of the U.S. Marine Corps is the Marine Corps Gazette. And so if there's any one branch that is stereotypically stand tall and salute, do as you're told, it's probably the United States Marine Corps. But if you actually go read the War College Review, because many Marines end up going to the Naval War College or the Marine Corps Gazette, you'll see an active dialogue about the counterterrorism, the effectiveness of our Queen strategy through Iraq and Afghanistan, the role of unmanned, right? And so there is all of the services operate a war college where all senior officers are required to go, where you're actually told to write a paper.
There's real academic rigor.
There's real academic rigor there. That's a boring thing to put into a movie. And since so few people act. Look, here's a bunch of dudes with short haircuts in a grad school class in international relations.
I've thought about my own life, and like if anyone ever wanted to write, for some odd reason they were misguided, they wanted to write like a movie about me or documentary, that my Rocky training sequence would be just sitting reading a book, turning pages. And then it'd be like the worst training sequence in a movie ever. The worst
montage of all time.
With the worst. Right. A hardcover, a paperback,
a magazine, a journal article.
Exactly. So printing paper, printing at the copy machine.
That never makes it into the movies. But the truth is that the services and the department in general, right, knows that there are 3 or 4 technologies that could fundamentally alter the nature of warfare and how to adopt them in a way that preserves U.S. advantage and our ability to defend the way of life. And so there's an active, both academic and practical dialogue.
I want to go back to something that probably most people find boring, but I find really interesting, which is failure mode analysis. And the reason, just by way, a small bit of background, is that the way that I'm pushing companies now to do what they might call AI governance or responsible AI or AI ethics is to engage in an ethical version of failure mode analysis.
Oh.
I don't call it that to their face because no one wants to hear the phrase failure mode analysis or failure mode effects analysis. But like that at the core of what I'm suggesting and working on building with clients, it's that. And one thing that you, for the audience, failure mode analysis, you're welcome to correct me or augment whatever I say, but it's something like, let's think about the ways this thing can break and make sure that either those things don't break or that if they do break, we detect it early on so that we can stop the ultimate outcome of that thing breaking being some kind of catastrophe. The brakes fail, but there's a backup system, and so we don't crash or whatever it is. So I wanted to hear more about that in this particular issue of predictability, right? So a failure mode, when you're doing a failure mode analysis, you're like, okay, I've got this coffee machine or a car or a submarine. Let me think about the way that it can break. In a car, maybe the brakes go. How do the brakes go? Maybe the brake pads are too thin. Maybe the brake line is severed. Maybe blah, 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 blah. So there's all sorts of, and then you think about all those ways that it can break down, and then you attempt to solve for those. That's at 30,000 feet, that's what goes on, right? When it comes to failure mode analysis for an AI, it seems a bit harder, especially when you're talking about multiple AI systems or multiple digital systems, including databases and just regular old software and narrow AI and generative. You've got all these pieces of software with interdependencies. And so it seems like there's lots of ways, there's lots of failure modes. There's more failure modes than you could possibly predict.
True.
Because there's so many contexts. So I guess two questions. One is, so what does failure mode analysis look like given that, the thing that you just said was true? And secondly, can you say more about and how does that relate to your point about systems of systems?
Yeah. Let me bring both of those together. Systems of systems and failure mode analysis thing into one idea.
Yeah. Then we can talk about teams of teams.
Another book that they can show us excitedly flipping the pages on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We're really at an impasse. And I've just been talking with my team about this in the last 2 weeks. We're at an impasse and we're at the end of the value proposition of systems engineering. I truly believe this. We had automation engineering. The way I described this kind of at the highest level of abstractions, for a long time, you had to go turn the valve by hand. And then we had automation engineering where you can push a button and the valve turns. And then we had supervisory control. We had SCADA systems and industrial control systems where you could push a button on a screen. So it's not even a real button. And then the supervisory control automated all of the valves and pumps that were supposed to come on to actually accomplish a function. Now we've added AI on top of that so that the AI can decide when and why the supervisory control should align the system. And that's not working out really well. Every new, and I'm going to just give practical examples, right? Every new major industrial system is taking way longer than they should, sometimes longer than their loans. If you think about something like building the nuclear power plant in Vogtle, like a bankrupted Westinghouse, right? If you think about the latest naval aircraft carrier, the Ford class carrier ended up almost 6, 7, 8 years late. So the most complicated systems we want to build now using systems engineering as a design principle to lay out these system level industrial controls, they're all going late. They're all going over budget. And what systems engineering did for us was, humanity's only been building stuff out of software for 60 years, Reed. It's crazy to think about that. And we've built all of civilization on that 60 years worth of experience. And the last 30 years or so, we've used systems engineering to define the requirements for how the software and the machine were supposed to work together. And we're starting to see less than good outcomes, over budget, over years, over time, and it just doesn't work like we wanted it to. And we're back into a multi-year fixing process. Where we're saying you've got DevSecOps, which is a way to build and test software at the same time to raise the quality level of software. You have systems engineering, which are pretty good for deciding what all physical components you need in the system. But what we're missing is the engineering discipline for saying how the AI should interact with kind of those other two components. And so we're starting to use this term called orchestration engineering. The problem, Reed, is that there is no discipline for orchestration engineering in the world. Right? Nor is there a tool set. Now that's what our new company, Caliburn, is building what we think is the tool set for that. But it's more important right now that we all get our arms wrapped around the problem. And so what you're pulling the thread on is, how do you set up acceptance criteria? Let's say you're the buyer, like you're buying it, I'm making. So how do you set up acceptance criteria? And I prove that I meet the acceptance criteria, so you're getting value for the money for the thing that you're paying for. Like, we're
Sure.
missing an engineering discipline that allows us to even have that contract.
Mm.
And you want it to work, you want it to be safe enough. That's how you're going to
Right.
reflect your ethics on some safety standards. This is my morals about how this thing should work and in the world. And so it's very difficult for you to set a requirement that I can prove that I meet without orchestration engineering to start to bring together some of that practice and those tools in practice.
Yeah. So I think I get all that. Basically, you're saying like we don't really have the answers yet, although I get your company's working on a particular answer. So let me paint a picture and or just mention a couple of things, and you tell me like what's missing from that picture or something like that.
Sure.
So suppose I say, and this is going to be obviously overly simplified, but hopefully illustrative. So suppose you say something like, all right, look, Zach, it's not that complicated. So what we need is still something like failure mode analysis. We've got this AI system. We're going to get a cross-functional team involved.
Yeah.
So we'll get the techies involved. We'll get like the operations people. We'll get the blah, blah, blah. And we're going to have them do something that's akin to a failure mode analysis. We're going to try to predict the ways that things can break. And we're going to do the appropriate mitigations and blah, 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 until we get down to a sufficiently low level. We know that we can't predict all the things. So we're just going to do the best we can. And we can share with our buyer, whomever it is, or the executive who's responsible for green lighting or red lighting the project to actual deployment to use. We'll do what we can, and we'll couple that with increased monitoring. Maybe we start paying, let's say we're a corporation, we start paying watchers, or we're the military, we've already got watchers employed. So we're going to increase resources dedicated to watching / monitoring. Isn't that, is that approach fundamentally missing something? Have I failed to capture something that you highlighted?
I think the number one thing you're missing in that approach is, what are the failure modes in that scenario? It's probably some failure modes out of systems design and systems engineering, like the way the machine breaks. I think we're decent at those, actually. But the more complicated failures are the system of systems level failures, right? Say
more about that. Yeah.
So those are the cascading errors that lead to catastrophe type failures that we've seen for years. I actually think that we're in an interesting time and place in the kind of the development of student engineering discipline to figure out what those are. Because almost all of these systems that we're designing right now, the standard is, can you do it as good as the humans did, or maybe a little bit better? Sure. And we actually have a pretty good performance curve for what you should be able to do in certain disciplines, right? So in our discipline, one of the most interesting kind of early use cases we're looking at orchestration engineering for is, how do you judge an AI navigator? If the U.S. Navy is going to slap its logo and its flag on 200 unmanned boats, how do we say that those are as safe as the ones that we put people on, which still have access?
Sure, yes.
And so lucky for us, and in most professional contexts, there is some sort of professional certification test that a human has to pass. So I thought it was pretty, in a pure information domain, when ChatGPT passed for the LSAT and the MCAT with great scores, I was like, oh, wow, that's interesting. And so I'm saying professionals in most domains becoming a civilian master mariner that has a test. And so what we need to do, I think one of the first elements of this failure mode analysis, there is, because they almost always went to court, right? There's case law for almost every time one ship hit another and what the scenario was. There are test banks. And so I believe that the first principle of orchestration engineering is, we used to set a quantitative, measurable characteristic of the machine relative to some telemetry or metrology that we could measure. Like, it has to go this many miles an hour. It has to be this thick, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
What we were really doing was translating the human desire into something we could take a machine to go measure the machine with, right? And now we need to go the other way. And we need to say, how do we measure the human's performance at that? And instead of now adapting the human performance into some machine quantity, actually find a way to make the machine take the human test and then measure it against the quality standard that we would either insure, certify, or license the human to do that activity.
Yeah. Okay, so if I summarize, it's, sure, you can do the failure mode analysis.
Yeah.
try to predict which way this is going to go wrong, recognize that in certain very complex systems, you're not going to be very good at it because there's all these, no individual component of the system is broken, but the way each operates, there's cascading effects such that we wind up with big failure at the end of the day, even though, so the system is problematic, even though, and then the question is not how do we do failure mode analysis on each one of the subsystems, maybe you do that as well, but also how do you test the system? And I think the answer is you don't test the system in the way that you test the components of the system. You test the system in the way that you test humans.
Exactly.
Which means that, number one, first you need to collect the goddamn data about people because we don't have a lot of human performance data.
Yeah.
There was a person on this I had on here, Hilka, I can't remember her last name, but she was in HR, wrote a book called The Algorithm. And her point, one of the things that she highlighted was, to me that was really interesting, is we don't collect data around the performance of people in HR. So we don't know, are they doing a good job hiring? We don't really know. We don't have the data. Did the people that they hire wind up doing a good job or a bad job? Did they wind up doing a good job for the reasons for which they were hired? Or were they hired for one set of reasons, but they succeeded for an entirely different set of reasons, in which case the hiring process wasn't the thing that really did the trick. And when we ask this question, how does AI compare to the human? In many contexts, HR context, apparently military context, we don't know because we don't have the data about humans, let alone the data about the AI. But anyway, the general structure is, though, test the subcomponents in a sort of standard engineering fashion and test the whole, the system itself, in the way that you would test humans. I think that's
And one of the ways we think that the AI rollout is done in the safest, most effective way is choose areas where we do have a human certification standard. And the one example I gave you, it was navigating a ship. Like we have a graduated standard. We have a graduated standard for that. There are many other domains where there exists a human certification test. And so part of, I think, the role of the people doing these systems levels designs is saying, hey, we have the opportunity to deploy AI against some of our workloads. Which one should we do first? That's good. Let's go do the ones where we know how to measure whether it's doing a good job.
Let me give you a sort of light pushback inspired by the movies that we were talking about earlier. I can imagine someone on Team Human saying, look, there's the tests, and then there's something like human intuition, human grasping of context. There's knowledge on the one hand, there's wisdom on the other.
Yep.
You're picturing the captain of the ship who says, I don't care what the damn book says. Take a left or whatever. It's probably more precise than that. It's carry
port,
on, press on.
It's not left, it's port, but I'm with you, Reed.
Yeah, I knew that, of course. I knew that for the people.
Yeah.
I don't really understand why they need to call it port. Why can't they just say left? Okay, I'll put that to the side. So suppose I say, hey, look, Zach, you're trying to quantify the unquantifiable. You're trying to do these rigid tests that people in management would love because the human scored a 75, the machine scored an 83. We're going to use the machine. But in truth, that attempt to quantify the human contribution is essentially fundamentally misguided or something because it doesn't capture.
Yeah, you hit on something else that, again, is really worth highlighting here. First and foremost, let's just continue to extend the analogy, right? And I'll give you a very practical example. There's the international rules of the road. We often call them coal regs, which are the rules for how ships should maneuver around one another. And ships follow those most of the time, except when they don't, right? So some practical examples. In Singapore, the Straits of Malacca just get really small. And there's a dredged channel through the middle of it. Almost all of the big ships going from out of the Suez Canal all the way around to China and Japan go through there, as well as tons of fishing craft, et cetera, right? It is really crowded. The rules of the road say one thing, and the big ships stay in the middle of the channel, and you better get out of the way. Up off of Newfoundland, the fishing trawlers go out there and they sleep it. So they're bobbing around. If you're expecting them to move, regardless of what the rules say, like it's going to be a bad day.
Yeah.
So there's all this international contextualization around how ships actually maneuver and what the humans expect. There are some places where if you get like 100 yards away from somebody else, it feels safe going up and down the Mississippi River. But if you're in San Diego Bay, where there's tons and tons of room, you get 100 yards away from people, it spooks people. It makes them think you aren't being careful. And you're absolutely right. You can't grade a safe navigator just by passing the pole resume. That's why the license certification also has some component of you have to do it X number of times, right?
Yeah.
And so we have the number of times. So there's an experiential as well as a textbook component. That's where the watchers come in really handy. Hey, we're going to make you take the test, and then we're going to go have minders watch you actually do it in these different scenarios in grade.
This is like a driver's test, right? When I take my driver's test, there's the written component and there's the driving component. And you're in the car with a watcher and they grade you.
And then the AI will overfit to the written test, right? And outperform and maybe an awful driver. And so in developing these scenarios, we've got to think through what is the baseline rules that the system has to understand, and then design this experiential test. And I think that's the military does and funds large exercise, validation, and training events. So it's interesting that the funding lines are already there for these sorts of graded exercises, where in lots of other contexts, if the money's not there and it's got to be taken from somebody else, something's just probably not going to happen. But if the people are there and the money's there, it's again, preconditions are right. Time will tell if the military gets this right.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just that the military takes safety of its personnel very seriously.
Seriously.
Safety of the resources that cost so much. Ships are expensive. You really don't want them crashing. They're expensive to fix, and it could be catastrophic.
And one of the things you alluded to, one thing that I wanted to circle back to. There is lots of people in this space have a probability doom, like P-doom, right?
Sure.
That one of the things that I like to point out in this discussion is the most dangerous technologies in the world most of them have been invented by the U.S. military, at least sort of the last 50 to 100 years, and never been accidentally deployed against Americans. And if you think that AI somehow has the potential to be dangerous, the U.S. military actually has a really good history of handling dangerous technologies in a way that it doesn't accidentally deploy them against Americans.
Yeah. On the one hand, I see that's a piece of evidence, although it reminds me of the first time that I went bungee jumping, and I was talking to the owner of the bungee jumping school or whatever it was, activity, whatever. And we were talking about accidents. Of course, does bad things ever happen? And he said, none of the companies here have ever had an accident. And when I pressed, it turns out the reason that none of them have had any accidents is because if a company does have an accident there, then they're not allowed to operate anymore. So it's okay. I guess that shows. So trust us. You might just be one of those companies who haven't had the accident yet that would have wiped you off out of operations. Am I supposed to be comforted by the fact, or I don't know what? But yes, I get that there's like a history of
the Navy and bungee jumping are exactly the same, Reed.
Everything
about them are like it's a great analogy.
My mental model for how the military operates is how an Australian bungee jumping instructor operates. It's basically the same thing. Okay. Oh, you wanted to talk about some problems with the military. I said, don't forget, we're going to put a pin in the issues, the problems.
Yeah.
And then you said, oh, don't worry, I have that one. So what did you have in mind?
Yeah. So I have an opinion about this. I'm working towards this. I care a lot about AI ethics and safety, right? And then I also have my list of, this might not work. Part of the proposition here is there's this group of skeptics, right? I'm of the opinion that AI and robotic and autonomous systems, along with the increased cybersecurity, are absolutely vital to our national security. The military the U.S. military in particular, has a habit of doing amazing prototypes and demonstrations and then never adopting it at scale. So one of the things that we don't do well, we literally have a thing we call the valley of death, which is crossing innovations and successful prototypes into widespread use. So we are not good. And my concern, Reed, and this is at the highest level of kind of our national security debate right now, is that the People's Republic of China is more bellicose than ever. They're making unsinkable battle stations out of islands all around the Pacific by dredging them and building airstrips and other things on them, right? And Xi Jinping has told his armed forces to be ready for an invasion of Taiwan by 2027, which is tomorrow on the innovation horizon.
Yeah,
pretty
totally.
much, right?
Yes.
And so in response to that, you're seeing $1 trillion go into the national defense budget for 2026, 140 or so billion more dollars than thereabouts than in years past. A lot of that is going to go to re-energizing a kind of domestic manufacturing base, but no amount of factories deter China in America. They are so far ahead of us on manufacturing. So I'm fundamentally of the opinion that innovation and creativity is the best strategic and perhaps the only strategic deterrent we have against conflict. If China believes that they can predict and quantify the risks and that it's a quantity question, we'll need more of this to be successful, then the likelihood of an awful, terrible war goes up. If China looks at the way the United States is operating and we are invested both not just financially, but organizationally, process and policy wise, you're doing something entirely different. The calculus to start a war is so dramatically different, it actually creates deterrence. And so I jokingly tell people now that our nerds are our very best chance. Nerd, innovation economy, creativity, entrepreneurs, however you want to phrase it. But we've got to be prove that we can do the orchestration engineering required to cross that valley of death to get innovation at scale for operators to actually train and test with.
Yeah. So two things. One point of optimism and one point of just a further question. Point of optimism, the good news is that I hear Xi Jinping actually refers to port as left. So this is how, how unsophisticated they are.
Not know what he's doing over there.
So that's a bit of good news. The question, though, the serious question, though, is, so I can see someone hearing you say that.
Yeah.
Basically, again, military speak, we better get our shit together if we're going to be able to defend our national security. And then someone expressing the worry, then in that kind of rush to readiness, shouldn't we be concerned that safety guardrails, all the stuff that we've been talking about, is going to be left behind because we just got to move even if we break things along the way?
Yeah, I think that it is a valid concern, right? I have the same concern. So if someone said that, I would have to agree with them. What I'm saying is the preconditions for doing this both quickly and safely are present, as well as the bureaucratic momentum to do nothing. And so we've got to, as a nation, say we want our military to adopt these technologies. We want to tell them to put their money where their mouth is and say, hey, you say you can do this. Show us how to do this safely. As far as I'm concerned, we have not had very many good examples of large-scale AI rollout where people created the governance board and then actually gave them authority to govern.
Yeah.
And
it doesn't happen, for sure.
It doesn't happen, right? And so I think that the American people, it's just for some. The American citizens are going to pay $1 trillion for national defense, largest national defense budget ever. They should we should collectively demand that the military create and share its governance and AI safety strategy so that investment is worth more to our society than just national security. That investment is in methodologies and rigorous engineering approaches to doing this safely.
Yeah. I would only say that it can't just be engineering. Maybe before failure mode analysis gets done by engineers, because we're talking about technical stuff that breaks, but we're talking, I think, now about engineers are clearly have to be part of the problem, but insofar as we're talking about these really complex contexts of use, we're talking about, as people like to say, socio-technical systems.
Yes.
We're talking about lots of different stakeholders being impacted. It seems to me that the kind of testing that needs to be done, the kind of nightmare scenarios that need to be identified, the kinds of mitigations that need to be introduced, it can't just be engineers on the team. It has to be more collaborative than that.
No, I completely agree. I think everything we've learned, particularly as we pulling out of the best software is designed by poets and built by coders, right? Because the poets are like trying to respond to the feels that the people have that are using it. I think we're saying engineering just in the sense that at the end of the day, we're trying to produce a system that reflects our human values and solves for the actual human problem. And we can't do that without broad interdisciplinary teams.
Yeah. Zach, this has been a great conversation. Super interesting. Thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely, Reed. Call me back in a year or so. I'll tell you how it's going.
Hopefully we're still around.
Dead wrong.
We're just dead.
No way.
Oh, good. That's good. We can avoid that. All right. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I want to thank a few people who make this all possible. Delano Alexander, he's my producer. He does such an amazing job on everything that he touches. Garrett Lang is the sound engineer. That's honestly, he's too good for me. Athmia Jairam has joined us recently. He's helping us find the best guests to bring onto this podcast. And Ashley Wassilenko helps us organize all this, get people on the schedule, get people's bios, headshots, and really keeps the train on the track. So thanks, guys. Really appreciate all the hard work you do.